Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's version of Black Health Trust. We are so happy that you have chosen to spend this time with us, and we feel confident that you will enjoy and be edified by the subject that we are discussing today, because it is a subject that is having monumental impact on our country and in our community. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Neighbor-Stephens and Dr. Walks. Welcome everyone to Sunday afternoon with the Black Health Trust. I want to just say something briefly, not about the actual topic today, but many times as a health professional, you get your heart touched. Several weeks ago, we suffered the loss of one of our founding and early members, Dr. Wilbert Jordan. This weekend, one of my nurse practitioners who was actually assisting a lot of my patients and one of my best friends called and said that her 25-year-old daughter was found comatose with pinpoint pupils, and but a negligent amount of opioids were found in her blood, and she's not woken up yet. And just tells me that no matter what's happening, you never know when something's going to reach out to touch your heart, and tragedy may come. And we're going to talk about something today that is close to that. But I'm just wondering, in the spirit that we all need prayer, we usually end up with asking Pastor Pointer to close out with prayer. But I'm going to ask him if he would just give us 30 seconds of introductory prayer of protection for all of us and our families. And then we'll ask Dr. Neighbor to give their introductions of our speakers today. Dr. Pastor Pointer, would you?
Certainly. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth. Humbly yet again, a few of your servants bow together before your majesty, and we say thank you for all that you have granted us and all that you are yet doing with us. So we ask, O Lord, in this moment, that we recognize that we are constantly bombarded with moments of human extremity, and that you will be present with us, each and every one of us individually and all of us collectively. Grant unto us your protective power, and not only that, but give our hands work to do that will be to the glory of your name. We'll be careful to honor, praise, and thank you forever. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Dr. Neighbor-Stephens.
Thank you, Dr. Maxey. So I am very happy that we're going to discuss what we're going to talk about today, because I've actually been struggling with this issue in my work life for the always, but recently, over the last couple of months, I've just been struck by some very blatant examples of how isolation and loneliness impact people. We had a case where the patient had called the ambulance and had the ambulance to bring him to the hospital 6 times in a matter of 3 days. And when the nurse presented the case, I asked her, why was he calling the ambulance and coming and being brought to the hospital? What is the root cause of what's going on? And she said that he said he was lonely. I've had another really dramatic example of this in a situation where a patient had a foot surgery and had spent some time in a facility and had been discharged for 2 weeks. He lived in a rented room. He had major mobility issues and had been living off of potato chips for 2 weeks until he fell again and was brought back to the hospital, and his situation was discovered. I could go on with examples of this, but then when I saw the Surgeon General come out with his advisory earlier this week, I said, okay, I'm not imagining things, and the authorities and the experts are bringing it up. I reached out to 2 people that I thought were eminently qualified for this discussion today. They should be well you. One is our co-moderator, Dr. Ivan Walks, a psychiatrist, a public health officer, residing now in Maryland, who has led us through many great conversations. He has interest in not only medicine, but also, if someone before we open the show, he is always sharing with us his experiences with his men's group in his church. And just, he's involved in a lot of things and can speak to this issue from a professional point of view for sure. The other speaker today is another frequent guest on our program, Pastor Pointer. Pastor Kenzie Pointer is in Buffalo, New York, where he pastors and is involved, I think, in every board that exists in the city of Buffalo, and probably a few statewide boards as well. Not that that's not enough to do. He's also currently involved in helping to educate and train our future physicians so that they will be the servants that we need in the medical community. So without further ado, I will turn it over first to Dr. Walks.
Thank you, Dr. Nabor-Stevens. Good afternoon again, everyone. It's always good to be here on Sunday afternoon. First church and then Black Health Trust, and that's my Sunday, and that's a good Sunday. I really appreciate having a chance to talk about this. Dr. Nabor-Stevens, as she said, reached out, and I had already gotten an email highlighting the report, and Dr. Pointer reached out to me and we had some conversation. I want to just introduce the seriousness of this, because we don't think about loneliness and isolation as being health problems. We think of them as just being something that people feel, but we don't talk a lot about the impact. So what I want to do briefly, and I've only got 5 or 6 slides, is to just hit a couple of highlights from the Surgeon General's report, because that's sort of our official United States of America, there's a problem shout out. When the Surgeon General does a report on something or an advisory on something, it typically means that this is a societal issue. It's more of a public health as opposed to a immunological type or a bacteriological type of issue. So when we get an advisory from the Surgeon General, it usually means 2 things. 1, it's a big deal. And 2, there's been some research done. There's been some digging into the science of what this is. So you all know that I can talk a lot more than I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go with, here we go. And one more little click will get me there. So this is what we are looking at today, the health risks of isolation, as Dr. Nabor-Stevens pointed out for us. And I just want to hit, like I said, 3 or 4 important things to let us know why this is a public health and a personal health issue. These
Dr.
came
Walks,
from the Surgeon General's.
share your screen. We don't see it.
Oh, you all don't see it yet? Okay.
Not yet.
My apologies.
It's okay.
Let me do this. I thought I was just on the way. Okay, share screen. And okay, how about now?
Now,
Okay, thank you.
go ahead and click into slideshow so we
Right.
can see it better.
I had the
There you
slideshow
go.
and everything up and
All
working,
right,
but it
you
was just
good.
for me.
You're
Nobody-
cooking with gas.
Okay, all right. So the health risks of isolation coming from Surgeon General Murthy's advisory. Loneliness and isolation in younger adults, sleep problems, inflammation. And we know that inflammation is a big deal. We've talked about that enough times on the Black Health Trust. I won't dig into it. And of course, immune changes. The immune system protects us from all the stuff that's trying to kill us. So if you have immune problems, there are some problems. In older people, it's linked to pain. So sometimes when something hurts, it can hurt just because you're lonely. We talk about heartache and we sing about it in songs, but it's a real thing. Folks can feel pain, certainly sleep problems, depression, anxiety, and wow, shorter lifespan, all because you're isolated and you're lonely. Loneliness and isolation linked in all ages to higher risks of all the bad stuff, right? Heart disease, stroke, diabetes, addiction, suicidality, self-harm, dementia. All of these things can be more of a problem and cause more risk for us. And none of us wants these. If I were to ask for a show of hands of who wants any of these things on the right side of the screen, nobody's hands would go up. And when we try to quantify, social isolation may have the same mortality impact as smoking 15 cigarettes a day and more mortality impact than obesity or physical inactivity. So the things that we really, if you ask most of us health people, what do you really want folks to do? We'll say, well, okay, they can start with don't smoke, keep your weight under control, and get up and move around. Then we get into diet and everything else. But these are really some of the, like, this is 3 of the big 5. And just from being isolated and being lonely, these things can really have a profound impact on our life expectancy and on the quality of our lives. I think that might be the last one. Yes. So let me get out of the screen. Oh, there we go. Stop share and get us back. So I wanted to just set the stage for the fact that this is not just Dr. Walks thinking it's important, and this is not just Pastor Pointer thinking that people need to reach out to each other. This is really a health challenge in our communities, and it's something that at the national level, folks have done some research, combed through the data, and have information for us that should drive us to move forward. So with that, I'll let Dr. Pointer, Reverend Pointer, take over, and then I'll come back later.
All right. So what I want to talk to us about is this becomes a critically important issue for us, not simply because the Surgeon General issues an advisory and that there is a plethora of research that supports the advisory that the Surgeon General issues, but that anecdotally, there isn't one person on this broadcast today who doesn't know this firsthand. You may not have recognized it initially, but as we talk today, you'll more readily recognize what we're talking about. And particularly right now, today is May 7th, 2023. So 358 days ago, a white supremacist came into the city of Buffalo and proceeded to rip away 10 members of this community, and then to cause severe catastrophic injury to 3 other members of this community. But before that, there was a real isolation index that got heightened as a result of the isolation that we all went into when we went into the lockdown that was caused by the coronavirus pandemic in late 2019 and the beginning of 2020. As I was operating the coronavirus response project here in Buffalo and Erie County in 2020, my staff kept saying to me, Pastor, people are showing these signs that they're not okay. And so I had already included in the questionnaires that we were asking people what's known as Patient Health Questionnaire 9, which Dr. Walks and every physician knows very well because it's a basic mental health screening with a score and an outcome that really can tell a clinician whether someone is suffering some severe form of behavioral complication. What my staff kept saying to me is that when they would call people, we were calling people on the telephone. And when they would call people on the phone, that people wanted first to know who they were. And so once that was established, then we asked a bunch of questionnaires. And now look, all of us have been who we are for our whole lives. And we really aren't really friendly with people calling us on the phone to ask us a bunch of questionnaires because it has become, in a lot of ways, the great American nuisance. Because we get a bunch of these calls all day, every day. But in this instance, two things my staff pointed out to me, and I knew this because I opened the day with them all and then debriefed with them at the end of every day. And one of the things they pointed out very quickly was that people were interested in being chatty, in spite of the fact that we were really invading their privacy. Although we were doing it for all of the right reasons, people weren't hanging up. They weren't angry about being asked. We were asking 5 questionnaires. They were not angry about the questionnaires. They were not angry about anything. He said that in a lot of instances, people wanted to continue a conversation. And of course, I trained them that, once we get the information we need and discover how we can help them and refer them for the help that they need, we need to move on to call the next person because, there are 1 million people in Erie County. And we were trying to call as many people as possible. And then the second thing they noted, and this was without any clinical training at all, my staff noted a level of heightened loneliness and depression that people seem to be suffering from. And without having any medical training at all, they were able to say to me, there's something wrong with this person or that person. And they would often simply give that person my phone number to call, and they would call me. So in the midst of that, I decided that I needed to do 2 things. One, I needed to get my staff trained on what we call mental health first aid so that they can become more astute at screening for the conditions that could lead to self-harm, and that they would learn how to ask those questions directly. Are you going to hurt yourself? Do I need to get someone over to see about you immediately? And so I rotating I had 91 staff, so I rotated them in the mental health first aid training, which is about a week-long training, can be done remotely. And so we did that. And then the other thing I did was I formed an alliance with 2 mental health consortiums here in Buffalo and Western New York. First with Endeavor Health of New York, and then with No Wound Untreated. And we were able to get people referred on the same day, and they would get an intake that day. Now, Dr. Walks can tell you that's not the normal process for getting mental health care and treatment to people. It generally can take weeks and months. But what I said to both CEOs at Endeavor and at No Wound Untreated is I don't believe we have weeks. I believe that when we refer people to you, they need immediate attention. And they agreed that because they weren't seeing people in the office, they would dedicate staff who would do an immediate intake. And so we were able to get a number of people the kind of care and treatment they needed immediately. But it was a hallmark of what I've noted in all of my career as a pastor. This level of loneliness that's often associated with older Americans. And I use that term on purpose because all of us are young in that, we're not the ancient one. We're not God. So we've only been our life, however long it is just a vapor. So we while we often like to say, I disdain getting old. Well, count your blessings, because however old you are, you're still young. But one of the things I noted is that this was more and more pronounced in younger and younger Americans, and particularly in a community like ours, which commonly doesn't have widespread behavioral health care and treatment in our community. And because we don't have widespread behavioral health and mental health care treatment, that people often suffer with any number of maladies that have been long untreated. And when you force people to stay away from other people, those things get exacerbated very quickly. Also noted that when I would talk to children, that they also were exhibiting the characteristics of the loneliness that generally comes from isolation, and that the late Gardner Taylor highlighted for me when he talked about what he called the enemies of old age. And one of them, Dr. Taylor characterized this way. That's the late Gardner C. Taylor, formerly of Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn. He said to me, there is a place where I'm surrounded by people. I'm active every day. He was then in residency at Duke University. And he said to me, I'm lonely. And I said, please, Dr. Taylor, expand on that. And he said to me, I'm not lonely because people are not around. I'm lonely because I cannot say to someone, do you remember when? And get an affirmative answer. All of my peers are long gone. And while I ask God for this longevity, it comes with this loneliness that no matter what I do, no matter how big the crowd, I can't shake, because I no longer have peers who I'm familiar with, people who are, and at the time he was 95 years old. He said, people who I can remember, reminisce with, and hearken back to what he called the good old days. And I suggest to you that even that condition can be the condition of young people once they're disconnected from the familiarity of friendship. And in the modern age, with all of the screens that we allow young people to be on, they may not even understand what friendship is. But I promise you, they will know what loneliness is, because as I'm talking to young people, that's what they are telling me. I just don't feel like I'm connected to other children, to other kids, to other teens, to other students, both at the university level and then at the graduate professional level. And so one of the things that I've endeavored to do as a pastor is endeavor in as many places as possible to create community. And so today I want us to have a conversation about how easy it is to create community wherever we are with the people who are around us. Because when we're looking at what the Surgeon General is warning us about, it is profound how many different health maladies are affected by the kind of loneliness and isolation that he talks about, and that the researchers have uncovered in their work leading up to this Surgeon General's advisory. And I think that in our community, where the treatment of our head is a secondary consideration and often overlooked entirely, we should talk about how do we help each other to a place of healthiness and to a more common understanding of your sense of self and what you need from other human beings to be your best self. And I'm hoping that we can have that conversation and have an open dialogue among ourselves about how we do that. So let me give you a quick example of what I mean by creating community. About 8 years ago, I started teaching in the medical school, and there were only 7 underrepresented minorities out of 170, 180 in the medical school. And so they were literally isolated. So I invited them all to my house every Friday for a meal. In Buffalo, you can get a fish fry every Friday. So I use that to create community and invite them. And then as we began to ramp up and to take in more students who are underrepresented minorities, I made sure that we met every one of those students upon their coming for the interview process, and then inviting them to that, because the interview process generally began on Wednesday and went through the weekend. So I would make sure that those interviewees who were coming here to consider the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences knew that there was a place where they would find community. And we would bring them all to the Friday night fish fry. And of course, my house would be full of medical students and other professionals, but that never bothered me because 2 things: I love people, and the other thing is I love to cook, because cooking gives me a chance to think. So it gave me a double outlet, and we were able to create community that way. And this year at graduation, we graduated 28 underrepresented minorities. That's from 7 in 2021 to 28 this year. So you can see that we've really expanded how we're approaching this. But one of the things that those 28 said to me, because we do a luncheon, or rather it's actually a dinner for the families after graduation, after commencement. We do a dinner for those families and students as they're leaving. It's almost like an exit interview. And what the students said to me unequivocally is, "Thank you for creating community for us. I have no idea how I would have made it in Buffalo for 4 years if you hadn't done that prior to us getting here." And I'm suggesting to you, we can do that everywhere we are. That it doesn't take a lot. I mean, I spent less than $200 a week on a meal that fed between 40 and 60 people every week. That's not a lot of money. I mean, that reduced that to the ridiculous. It's about $3 a person. I mean, you can't eat out for that. But the other thing is that you create connections that people so desperately need, and that people, when they have concerns, they have others to share them with and to talk to. And that is how we begin to address what loneliness and isolation could look like. And when we see it, that's how we could actually do something about it immediately. And it doesn't take just enough concern to care about each other, and then share enough of yourself to not be selfish with you. And so when I'm looking at depression, anxiety, when I'm looking at cardiovascular disease, I'm looking at increased diabetes, I'm looking at those chronic diseases that so rapidly kill us in greater numbers than they kill the rest of the country, then I know we have to address isolation and loneliness in a way that really doesn't require specific clinical care so much as it just requires open arms, at least as a start. So I'm anxious to hear what you are thinking and what you're experiencing wherever you may be as we're having this discussion amongst ourselves in the Black Health Trust.
Thank you so much, Reverend Pointer. You did all of it. You threw the ball and you caught it, because so many times we are focused on the problem, but you gave us the problem and you gave us a solution. There are a couple of brief things that I want to add. One is I really wanted to hit again what Dr. Neighbor-Stevens started us with. I was talking with a physician friend of mine who describes, and I forgot the exact name that she used when she talked about this syndrome. It's an actual thing that people come into the emergency room because it's a place where they can connect with other people. They at least have to evaluate you before they turn you away. And people will come repeatedly to the emergency room because it's that place. And if doctors don't recognize it, it can be a problem, which is actually one of the tenets in the Surgeon General's advisory, was for us to deepen our knowledge and understand how loneliness and isolation can present. So what Dr. Neighbor-Stevens talked about is one way in the medical community that it can present, is people showing up with some sort of a medical issue when there's really the something that is wrong is the loneliness part. The other thing I want to mention briefly is, and this goes into maybe your lane a little bit more than mine, Reverend Pointer, is so many times, my favorite song that plays in my head all the time is a song called Never Alone. I don't have to worry because I'm never alone. We used to sing that song when I was in the choir back in the day, and it plays in my head. I think about that distinctly, though, from the sort of loneliness and isolation we're talking about. When I think about that song, I think about it as, I'm not alone in this struggle. I've got the Lord, the Holy Spirit, I've got help. And so I don't have to lean on my own understanding. I don't have to lean on only my own personal strength. And I think oftentimes those of us that have a faith construct by which we live will say to someone, well, you need to pray about this. And that's true. And that's accurate. And that's not all that the person needs to do. And so I think there's an opportunity for us when we have someone who rightfully says, I'm going to pray with you, I'm going to pray for you. In addition to that, there is that human connection. Sometimes the answer to the prayer is God working through another individual or some community construct in order to give you some of the support that you need. So I just want to point out to our clinical community that loneliness, isolation can present in a way that nobody says, hey, I'm depressed and lonely. And also to those folks who are in our faith community, that in addition to all the great advice and instruction about prayer and about faith, there's also the need for that person to person, which is why in church, the pastor would say, get up, say hi to somebody, hug somebody, you know, that kind of thing, because it might be the only human contact they get for that week. So Dr. Maxey, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, thank you for giving Reverend Pointer and I the opportunity to bring this to the Black Health Trust. And I'll kick it back to you guys.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens, for bringing this topic up, and Dr. Kinzer and Dr. Walsh for talking about it. And not to be funny, but last week we did talk about zebrafish who normally swim together, and those who were thought to be depressed, and I won't go into that, could not do well with others. So it affects even non-human species as well. Are there any questions or discussion? Anybody with a hand raised in the chat, Dr. Walsh? Dr. Stevens?
Well, I don't see any yet, but I want to go at this. I'm in total agreement with everything that's been said, but I want to take it from a different angle. I frequently will say to my co-moderators that I don't want to just talk about a problem, I want solutions. And that is certainly what we have started down the path toward today. But I'd like to put another solution out there, which is prevention. And what I've been thinking about, it came to me yesterday, actually. I was raised in the tradition of the Black Baptist Church. And most of the Black Baptist churches I've ever been a part of have all practiced, usually on the first Sunday, but at some point during the month, where everybody in unison repeats the church covenant. And part of the church covenant says that I will, upon removal from this place, as soon as possible, unite with another congregation. And I always thought, until recently, that that was just a way to keep church rolls up. But actually, I think our elders from the past, even before the formation of National Baptist Incorporated, back in even the slave times, they understood the value of slipping away at night and coming together and communing with each other. I think that was translated in the mandate of the covenant that you unite with another congregation if you are removed from this one, because the importance of that is that you have those supports. But where I'm really going with this is that also, the first thing I did when I went to prep school in Troy, New York, was to find a church to go to in Troy, New York. When I went to Cambridge, I looked for a church to go to and join in Cambridge. I had the desire and I had the permission. I'm very concerned that our younger generations now do not have that inner discipline to follow, but more importantly, they don't seem to feel that it's okay to ask for help and to ask for connection. So we got a lot of work to do on each other.
Amen. Amen.
You're right. I see two hands up.
Yeah, Dr. Gibson has his hand, and then Shira has a hand up. So if we could go to Dr. Gibson first.
Thank you. I'm very excited about today's session, and I want to thank Reverend Dr. Pointer for coming and elucidating the way he has and touching the nerve about solutions to the pollution. That is very, very, very much what we as an organization could stand to pivot towards. I would submit that in low-hanging fruit, especially since we have so many healthcare professionals on the call, is that community health fairs, and it's that season again. Most medical schools and pharmacy schools have students that have points they need to get, the brownie points that they get for participating in health fairs and such. That is an incredible opportunity to reach a lot of people who don't feel a part. They don't feel like they're a part of any structured organizational congregation. So that way you can get some people in, you can identify some problems before they become problems. You can even offer them some prophylaxis, some preventive measures that they could take, dietary, spiritual, and otherwise. So I would submit that perhaps we could take advantage of the upcoming health fairs, most every spring and summer, that are available, usually in conjunction with pharmacy schools and medical schools. It's a great way to reach folks who feel disconnected.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gibson. Great suggestion. I would just add to that, the schools of nursing, all of the health ministries and churches, there are a lot of opportunities for us to let people know what's out there. If we can go to Shira, and then, and I hope I'm saying your name right. If I'm not, I apologize. and then Dr. Sherrod. And we're going to ask folks to keep their comments to about 1 minute or so we can get everybody in that wants to contribute. Please, Shira, go ahead.
Dr. Mays, thank you so much. Lo-
Gary, you muted yourself.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. And Dr. Pointer, you raised some valuable points, Pastor Pointer, but it's almost like it was like a post-isolation effect, because after COVID, I was kind of apprehensive of going out because I didn't know how to reaccommodate or reassociate or reconnect myself back to the community, back to work, because I was isolated. Because I have sickle cell, I didn't want to be by anybody, but we didn't have the resources to take that step out, to gradually put ourselves back into the world after COVID. And still now with COVID still existing, but it was like post-isolation effect to me. So I just wanted to thank you guys for the information.
That is
Thank you, Jared.
one of the things, Shira, I'll just say quickly, is that when I looked through the very long Surgeon General's advisory, that isolation was impacting 1 out of every 2 people, that was done before the pandemic. So if anything, that has gotten worse. So your point is a very good point. It has been a challenge for a lot of folks to reintroduce themselves to each other when we were taught during that time to keep our distance from each other. It's an issue, absolutely. Dr. Sherrod?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank all of the speakers for your excellent points. I think this is a major problem. I think the Surgeon General is really being what do you call it, avant-garde in pointing this out. I'd like to get your opinion on isolation from a different point of view. Of course, it's a major problem as you age and seniors being isolated. But my concern is the effect of technology on isolation. And we're seeing it more now in the younger populations, where they spend all of their time on devices and they're actually losing their human interaction skills or tools. And I'd like to hear your opinions on how do we deal with that? Because I think that is another form of isolation, to the point that we're losing our skills for human interaction at a young age because you're not getting it as much. You're spending all your time on videos or computers or whatever. If you understand, it's more of a question in getting your opinion on how do we deal with that and technology and human interaction. And then what effect does this have? This is a form of coming together, the Zoom thing. But how does that mitigate the isolation? Or is that a form that can be utilized to mitigate isolation?
Well, I would suggest that Zoom is a great way to get together, but we cannot allow it to become the only way we get together. In too many instances, we are too comfortable saying, well, let's set up a Zoom. Because part of human development and part of socialization is contact. It requires contact. And one of the things that we have done is we've allowed young people to be on screen after screen after screen after screen, so much so that they are socially awkward when it becomes necessary to interact with other human beings. So I do a couple of things, not just as a pastor, but also as a grandfather. When my grandchildren come to spend the weekend with me, I confiscate all their devices. Now, it sounds unreasonable, but I'm not interested in spending time with them while they have the head in their hand, and not because they're weeping, but because they're on a phone or a tablet So I confiscate all of those devices. I tell their parents their phones will be off, their tablets will be off. If you want to talk to them, you get two choices. You can show up and use your key, or you can pick up the phone and call. We still have a landline. I know that a lot of people don't, but we do. So I require them to sit and let's talk. Let's, they think granddad is cool. So while I have that, I'm exploiting that. We eat whatever they want to eat, even if I don't want to eat it, because it gives me a chance to sit down with them at the dinner table to remind them of the manners that they were taught. And what I am learning from my grandchildren are a couple of things. One, that what you teach your children, if you teach it to them well, gets passed on. So one of the common refrains that I hear from my grandchildren is, well, my mom says that, my dad says that. And I'm like, yeah, well, where did they get it from? Same place I got it from, my parents. And so I make sure to put that in place. But the other thing I do at church, we do children's church like most church congregations, but I insist on the pastor's time in children's church. So I leave the adults in the sanctuary and go over to the children's church. But to go back to something that Dr. Neighbor Stevens alluded to, when I went away the first time away from my congregation that I grew up in, I was placed under watch care. And does anybody do that anymore? We were placed under watch care. I didn't leave the congregation I joined, but I joined the congregation I went to under watch care. And then they saw about me. They checked in on me. They looked in on me. When I go to children's church, I spend specific time with them, one-on-one with them. I sit down where they are, whether it's on the floor or at the table, and I interact with them. And my young people from the earliest ages know they can come and talk to me. And I think that we have to, we can't take away all of the technology, but there has to be a place where we require them to put the technology aside so that we can give them the kind of socialization skills that are going to be necessary if they're going to be able to have a conversation with another human being, if they're going to establish a relationship with other people who are not in their family, in their immediate circle of acquaintance. And how do you accommodate meeting new people if you've never been taught how to meet people? And so I think we have given our children too much screen time. And while they've learned everything on screens, I think it's a requirement for us to teach them basic socialization skills. And if they see us, one of the things I never do is have my devices at the dinner table. I refuse to do it. And trust me, as a pastor, I'm always a little rabid about it, but I get over it. And believe it or not, I get through it. So I think we've got to teach our young people that that's possible, that they can survive without their devices. And trust me, my youngest grandchildren all have their own tablets. 2, 3 years old, they got a tablet. And if you don't teach them to do without it some of the time, what you'll discover is they'll do without you.
So Reverend Pointer, go ahead, Dr. Maxey.
And this question might be more in your ballpark. Are there any personality traits that would lead a person to have not good interactions with other people, so they self-isolate because of their personality more than it not being available? They don't know how to take advantage of it.
So Dr. Maxey, you're always trying to trick me. You know that any question that starts with "Are there any?" the answer is always yes, because the diversity in our world is profound. But let me answer your question this way. I will say to my patients, I will defend to the death your right to be an individual. And I think personality traits, the way that we develop, the things that we're exposed to as we're growing, all impact how we connect. The pandemic has actually impacted people's personalities. A lot of folks who would be outgoing and couldn't wait to get out into public are terrified to go out now because they are unaccustomed to being around people. Yesterday, we had another mass shooting at a mall in Texas. I've talked to folks who are worried about taking their families to the mall because people are getting shot. The horrible hunting of Black people that Reverend Pointer talked about up in Buffalo. So yes, a lot of things impact us. And at the same time, we get lonely. At the same time, we isolate. So whether someone has a medical condition, they're somewhere on the autism spectrum, for example, and so they don't connect with people in a way that we would expect other folks to do, or whether it's someone who is absolutely out there and just the personality is on 100 all the time. We have to be able to meet people where they are. And it's one of the things that I think that pastors are particularly good at is looking at the different, and correct me if I'm wrong, Reverend Pointer, looking at the different members of their flock, of their congregation, and connecting with people in a way that makes sense for that person. And I think if we could all learn a little bit about that, it would be great. One quick comment about the screen time. I'm a big advocate of people using technology and learning technology. And at the same time, I agree with Reverend Pointer that it's good to take the screens away. But the one part he didn't mention is this, Reverend Pointer, when you take your grandkids' screens away and they still want to come over, it means you're the fun grandpa. It means you have to find a way to entertain them. And I think that may be the best part of it, is it forces us to interact in ways that are interesting to young people. We can't just expect them to put the screens down. I can't wait to go visit Reverend Pointer. I bet he's a fun grandpa. I'm gonna go over there and get some good food and have some good fun, because it will keep us younger and more interactive with the grandkids if we accept that we got to do something, not just take the screens away.
Yeah, one of the things that my grandchildren said to me was, can we come spend spring break with you? And I was like, well, I wasn't prepared for that. And that was not on my list of things to do. And while they were on spring break, well, I wasn't. But I said, well, if that's what you guys want to do, then Granddad will have to figure out how to carve out time to just hang out with you. And so that's what we did. They were here for the whole week. We sat up late and, we played, believe it or not, we played board games.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about nothing. They got extra Bible lessons because they wanted that. And that was a surprise to me. And then we went out. I mean, we went to the movies. I think there was a new Marvel Cinematic Universe movie in the theaters. We went in the middle of the day. We made dinner together, and then finally on Friday, they said to me, well, Granddad, we want ramen tomorrow. So I was like, no problem. I can do that. Ramen is easy because I live in a neighborhood that's pretty homogenous. And, but in Buffalo, you can find whatever kind of food you want. And you know what my grandchildren said to me? No, Granddad, we want to do it from scratch. So we went shopping and bought everything, and we made ramen together from scratch. I got a chance to teach them how to handle knives, how to be safe with the stove. And these are the like 10, 11, 12-year-olds. So they're at that point, but that's what they wanted to do. And I'm like, wow. And I was like flabbergasted. And kids asking to eat vegetables. I mean, come on, who does that? And so they were looking, they said to me, we need button mushrooms, we need scallions, we need ginger. They listed everything we needed and we went and got it. And then we came home, we washed up everything, we cut up everything, we made even the noodles from scratch.
How old are they?
Between 10 and 12.
So,
Between 10 and
so-
12. And it's 6 of them total.
Well,
And they were
my.
all here.
My.
I'd like to thank both you and Dr. Walks. This has been a really interesting and necessary discussion. We probably need to continue it too. We're at just going past the top of the hour. Are there other questions in the chat or hands up? Dr. Neighbor Stephen?
You're
You're
muted,
on
Dr.
mute, Dr.
Neighbor
Neighbor
Stephen.
Stephen.
Oh, I had another conversation going here.
Oh.
The chat seems to be quiet.
So,
Okay.
so what I see in the chat, Dr. Maxey, are comments in support of Reverend Pointer's approach to grandfathering, and I'm certainly in support of that. One last comment on this topic I want to make, Dr. Maxey, is that there are constructs that we can put into place in our communities that provide places for folks to go, places for seniors to go, places for young people to go. So once again, it comes back to public policy. And one thing about the Surgeon General's advisory is that it can influence public policy, as can we, as we look to our elected officials and let them know what is important to us. One of the things we didn't talk about today is how intricately useful Dr. Pointer, Reverend Pointer, has made his congregation and his flock to the larger community through his work with the elected officials and the political infrastructure. And I think that when we find churches, schools, individuals that are able to come together with that other infrastructure, we can get a lot done. So I'll end our talk for today with that note.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Dr. Neighbor Stevens a question, though, which may be related. I have a 17-month-old grandson, and his parents have limited his screen time, saying that he's not supposed to have screen time until he's 3. But Grandpa, of course, lets him use his iPhone and get screen time to watch CNN. Why are they not supposed to get screen time?
For a lot of the reasons that we've already discussed. In those young ages, that's where they are really developing their social interaction time. And your grandson sitting there looking at CNN is not sitting there looking at you and talking to you. And 17-month-olds can talk to you. You know, you're not going to solve the world's problems, but they learn by what you share with them. That's looking at CNN is no replacement for reading a story. Looking at CNN is no replacement for letting them help you do whatever you do in the kitchen. My kids started in the kitchen probably at about 15 months because they wanted to do everything I was doing. So it started off with them having a pot that they could hit. And it, you know, as they matured, the interactions matured. They all had little bitty cooking sets and their own aprons because they wanted to do what I was doing. They wanted to roll out the bread. They wanted to cut the biscuits. So that's why screen time is not necessary for those young children. Their social interaction as well as intellectual development that needs to occur that sitting there looking at a screen does not replace.
Can I just add, you go ahead and keep doing that. You're going to see how well your iPhone works real quick.
I get
You
locked out
always
every
had to
day.
replace it.
Well, let's have final words, and I'm going to ask Dr. Pointer at the end of our final words if he would grace us with a final prayer. Dr. Walks?
I would like to say that As Reverend Pointer said earlier, this is not something new that the Surgeon General discovered. This is a significant issue in our community, and it's really, we can make a difference with this. If we connect with people, the opportunity is there for them to connect back to us when something important is going on. If we ask someone, how are you? And then we wait and give them time to process and respond, a relationship happens, and they feel that we are someone that they can come to when something is a problem. So much is happening in our community with rising suicide rates, with lowering of productivity in some work environments because people have mental health challenges. And this is one that, as Reverend Pointer said again, you don't need any training to be nice to someone. You don't need any training to talk to someone and just say hello. It doesn't cost anything to smile as you pass somebody on the sidewalk. It really doesn't. And it's an opportunity for us to start making our society less lonely. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Dr. Maxey.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pointer?
I've got to tell you that I did, Dr. Stevens, you asked me earlier about how did worship go today. Well, I used part of the worship to prepare the congregants for the fact that we have a series of commemorations and solemn observances this week for the Buffalo 10 who were murdered last year. And that because this actually falls on Mother's Day, Sunday next, that we need to be very, very deliberate to be together, that no one is isolated, that no one is by themselves. And so we've created a series of public events around the city all week long. And whenever we do that, we affirm each other's humanity. And when you affirm someone's humanity, their sense of self is heightened and improved. And so, and it doesn't take a lot to do that. We could do that with a group of 200 or 2,000, but let's do it as often as possible. Let's honor the humanity of every person we meet and create a sense of self that is improved because we see each other and we make sure that no one is by themselves.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Pastor. That's Barbara Davis-Stevens.
I really just am so happy and thankful that we had this conversation today. I agree with Dr. Walks. We need to, I believe it was Dr. Walks, no, it's Dr. Maxey, that we're going to have to continue this because this is interwoven in the fabric of everything that we do. And so we will be talking about this more and more. So thank you everyone for participating.
And for my final comment, I'd like to take my hat off, even though I'm not wearing it, to Dr. Kinder. Every day, Kinder Pointer, every day I get a verse of the Psalms from him. And over the past couple of years, he hasn't missed a day except when he had to admit that he had a Korean phone as opposed to an iPhone. And I changed my number, but those Psalms have been so uplifting in some cases, exposed your fact that you're not as good as I like to think I am, but just so relevant to some things I'm going through every day to get those Psalms. But important is just an unspoken relationship that's so important. And I appreciate you reaching out to me every day with a Psalm. It's so helpful to me in my spiritual life and education. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your Sunday. Have a great, great day. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Simon.